I'm Michael James here in Chicago with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is number 158 since the beginning of the pandemic, when we were forced out of the studios at WLUW and went to doing what we call Heartland at home. It's the second in our fourth year, and we're really glad you're here with us. We're recording it on the 21st for the week of June 24th. And I have three guests today. I'm going to have an old comrade from, we're not only old, but we've known each other a long time, from Students for Democratic Society, Clark Kissinger. Also, someone I haven't met yet, but I'm looking forward to it, and that would be Victor Salvo of the LGBT Legacy Walk. And then a regular guest on the show usually talks politics. We're going to talk literature, the one and only Don Rose. So stick around for the next hour. However you're getting this, on YouTube, on the air, on WLUW, CAN TV, we're here for you, and you can get us a lot of ways. A little bit on the past week for me. I'm recovering from that fall I took in Texas. I did get to go back in the swimming pool, feeling pretty good. On Saturday, I went to a really wonderful event for the late, great Pat Gleason. Pat Gleason, I knew her through Salcedo Press. I learned a lot more about her at the memorial that was held at the Irish Heritage Center. And, there were over 100 people there with wonderful things to say about Pat. She was a Chicago girl, working class, grew up in Roseland. Her family had a bar. It was called Gleason's Tap. She ended up going down to University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, where she got involved with Students for Democratic Society. And she was one of the founders of Salcedo Press, who for many years really cranked out great printed matter for all kinds of groups working to make the world a better place. She was an educator. She was very smart. She was wonderful. She played the guitar. And I'm really sad that she's gone, but it was great to be with all of her comrades and friends and family and celebrate her life. This week also was Father's Day, and I had a pretty good time on Father's Day. I set up my front porch gallery, and then my son Katie and his girlfriend Gina picked me up, and we went to her parents for a wonderful cookout. And then Monday was Juneteenth. It's the second year we've celebrated it as a national holiday, and there were some great events all around the country. This is the day that the Texas slaves finally learned a couple of years later that they were free. It happened in Galveston, Texas. Okay, so a little bit of information and news, things that caught my attention. Out in Montana, there's a group of 16 young people who have sued the state. They say that the state has ignored scientific evidence and continues to promote fossil fuels, worsening climate change. They say that this violates their right to a, quote, clean and healthful environment, end quote, which is written into the Montana Constitution. It was guaranteed in the Constitution. So this is an ongoing trial, and we'll see how that works out. But it's great to see young people really taking it to them. My friend Al Koss, the photographer, who has a great book out called Fairs, which is shots he made in his cab over many years, turned me on to a thing called the Social Documentary Network that publishes Zeke magazine. You can find them on YouTube if you go to Social Documentary Network, or the title of what Al sent me was From Tulsa to Minneapolis, Photographing the Long Road to Justice. That would be Al Koss sent me the link for Tulsa to Minneapolis, Photographing the Long Road to Justice. And it's, I think, 26 African-American photographers with pictures from all over the country during demonstrations and campaigns to right the wrongs of our nation. I recommend it very highly, and that's one of the things I like about doing this show is in getting information, I find new things and people turn me on to new things. On the not so good front, the gun violence continues to plague our country big time, more than any other place, I think. And we know that there were a lot of people shot and killed in Chicago. Across the nation, there were at least 132 people killed over the holiday weekend. This is not good, and we all have to make a lot more efforts to stop it. In memoriam, Daniel Ellsberg died, and those younger people who may not remember, he was the one who worked at the Pentagon and released the Pentagon Papers exposing the United States military belief that they couldn't win the war in Vietnam. He took a lot of heat from it, but he also got a lot of people loving him forever. I think we may have a little information on him later when our first guest, Clark Kissinger, comes on. If he doesn't remember, what I read was that Ellsberg was at an SDS March on Washington back in the early 60s, and he met his first wife there, or somehow they linked up there. Also, our hearts go out to the Klonsky family, also the Enid family, Mike and Sue Klonsky, Fred and Ann Klonsky, and all the kids have been on the show. They're good friends of ours. And Sue's dad, Dr. Joseph Ennett, passed away just on the 13th. He did a great thing, and we're really sorry that he has passed away. Once again, our hearts go out to the Klonsky Enid family. I think that's going to be it for the opening banner. We do have 3 guests, and they all have a lot to say. So we're going to take a little musical break, and we'll be right back with Live from the Heartland for the week of June 24th. And as is a growing tradition on this show, we bring on former and current comrades who I know from way back in my political activities, this time with Students for Democratic Society. It's one of our leaders from back in the day, Clark Kissinger, who now is in Georgia. But I remember him when he was here in Chicago as the National Secretary of SDS, a guy who opened a gun store here in Chicago, who went on to open an organization or help found an organization in Rogers Park called Citizens for Independent Political Action. And that's what drew me to bringing you on, Clark, because I'm involved with a group called Network 49, a progressive outfit in the ward. And every once in a while, I'm older than a lot of people, and I remember that there was a group up in this neck of the woods that you were involved with. So without me running my mouth anymore, I'm saying hello to you, and how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. It's a lot warmer down here in Georgia than when I lived in the north.
It's cold here today. It's in the sun, but it's cool. We're right by the lake, as you know. So what have you been doing for the last 50 years?
No, more like 60. I remember I graduated from college in 1960. Wow. So I got involved in I guess in SDS in like 62 because I by that time I was doing graduate work up at Wisconsin, and somebody told me about some group called Students for Democratic Society, and I went to see this guy. He pulled a box out from under his bed, and it is full of mimeographed copies of the Port Huron Statement. And so I got one and I read it, and I was actually pretty impressed. 3 things that struck me in it. One was the idea that students could actually have agency. In the 50s, when I was in college, politics meant like playing in the sandbox of student government. And another thing that struck me was a call for politics based on morality. And a third thing that attracted me was anti-communism that was in the thing. I mean, none of us were communists then, but we knew what pernicious role that anti-communism and the McCarthy period had played in the period that we had just gone through. The end of the Port Huron Statement was a call to realign the Democratic Party, and everybody hey, Nixon finally did it. But nobody paid much attention to that. And by the end of 64, the Democratic Party was a dead letter because the first urban rebellion had occurred. The Mississippi Freedom Party was kicked out of the Democratic Convention, and Lyndon Johnson had done the Bay of Tonkin hoax. So we were off and running at that point.
Tell us a little bit about that March on Washington back in the day, the first one where I think Paul Potter gave a big speech.
Right.
I wasn't there, but I learned about SDS through the college press service. And I had read about, I read about a meeting on Hazard of unemployed miners, the Northern Student Movement, SNCC, and SDS. And it kind of captured my imagination. Then at Berkeley, while surrounding a police car with Jack Weinberg in it during the free speech movement,
right,
I found a piece of paper on the ground that was "Build the Interracial Movement of the Poor."
Right.
It talked about the economic research and action projects, including Join, where I came to work. That's when I knew about you, and you were in the national office.
Right. Well, you ask about that March on Washington. Up till that point, really nobody had done anything about the war in Vietnam. I mean, it was, I actually went to an anti-Vietnam War demonstration as early as 62, I believe, when Madame New visited the United States. But this was the Democrats' war. And so most progressive people sort of kept their mouths shut about it and went along with it. And SDS had a meeting in December of 1964, and somebody made a proposal that we do a march on Washington against the war. And I.F. Stone was actually at the meeting and spoke. It was a kind of a historic thing, and there was a lot of debate about is that what we should really do or not. And in the end, we did it, and it was very important. And it was the first major manifestation. Was not the first demonstration against the war, but it was the first national level manifestation. 25,000 people marched up the mall against the war, and it was a very significant thing. The other thing that was significant about it is it was done on a non-exclusionary basis. It's probably hard to realize today, but back in those days, if somebody, one of the mainstream organizations called an anti-war demonstration, any alleged communist organization was not allowed to participate. We did away with rules like that and said, hey, anybody that's opposed to the war is welcome to come.
Well, Clark Kissinger, you went on at the same time Join was going on in Uptown, and I'm thinking 66, 7, and 8. You left the national office and you started a group, or were involved in starting a group. I think Art Vasquez was one of the people. It was called Citizens for Independent Political Action.
That's
and
right.
It just so happens that it was in the 49th Ward where I reside today. So tell us about what led you to do that, what you guys did. And then I think you ran for office, but you'll get that in there.
I did. I'll get it in there. But, you know, the 60s was a huge educational thing for me. I mean, I think I tried every version of reformism possible in the 1960s. I went on demonstrations. I organized demonstrations. I voted for better candidates. I took part in civil disobedience. I later worked in a factory. I was elected a union steward. I ran for public office. I wrote exposés. And by the end of the 60s, it became clear that we lived in a system that could not be reformed. And what we had to do was actually to have a revolution. But this running for office and doing things like Citizens for Political Action, was independent political action, was part of that learning process. We were inspired by, what was the name of that guy that ran for Congress out in Berkeley and almost unseated major liberal progressive out there? And
Bob Scheer?
Who? Yes, Bob Scheer.
He was the editor of Ramparts, yeah.
Yeah, people said, wow, maybe we could actually take on the Democratic Party from the bottom up and oust all those people and take it over somehow. Well, of course, you can't just walk in and take over ruling class parties. But we ran an independent anti-war candidate. I was a candidate for alderman. And of course, in the Chicago machine, the aldermanic races, were held on odd numbered years, not when congressional and presidential elections. So there was an extremely low voter turnout. Nobody but whoever the poll workers got out. But I am proud to say that I got a vote in every single precinct of the 49th Ward. And I was running against Paul Wagoda. I don't know whether you remember that name.
I remember that name, yeah.
And although I lost, Paul Wagoda ended up going to prison on some sort of, financial hanky-panky. But one of my favorite campaign photographs is a picture of me standing in front of the 49th Ward Democratic Party office, pointing to it. And the caption was, "Kissinger investigates blight in the 49th Ward."
Nice. Well, tell me the kind of work you were doing then. I mean, I used to think of Rogers Park in the 49th Ward as kind of more middle class, I'm living in Uptown. Today, it's really multi-class, multi-racial. probably larger, I always say there are larger concentrations of more diverse racial, ethnic, and religious group than anywhere else. But my kid claims Queens in New York more
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
But we
Well,
have,
it was also something of a university community because of Loyola
right.
and Mundelein College, which was independent at that time, and probably the heart of the progressive community was actually north of Devon, and the northern end of the ward at that time. But we were out on the streets everywhere, campaigning against the war and calling on people to strike a blow against your real enemy. And I guess my campaign slogan was, "When a machine shortchanges you, kick it." And a lot of people, got involved in it, and it was interesting. And like I said, and it was part of that learning process about how you can't change society.
Well, we've gotten a little bit of you getting involved in the movement, and why don't you give us a short synopsis of some of the things that you think were important that would are still important today, and what people might do around them. I'm particularly interested in older progressives sharing their experiences and encouraging younger people to learn from our mistakes or pick up where we left off.
Well, as I said, I think at the end of the 60s and then going into the 70s, I basically made a break with idealism, and said, "Hey, look, you really have to get practical." And we live in a world today where we don't live in a world of scarcity anymore. It's in the history of the human race. It's an amazing thing to no longer live in a world where there's no reason for anybody to not have enough food to eat or have medical care or whatever. The only reason that the majority of the people of the world don't have that is an economic and political system of capitalist imperialism. And until that is overthrown, we are not going to be able to make significant social changes. And I learned that by, I had some important experience with the Black Panther Party. I went to China very early in 1972, got to see what alternatives might actually look like. And ever since then, I have been working in that direction. We live now also in a particular time where we have two enormous threats that we have to take on. One is the destruction of the climate and the entire planet. And it is a problem that simply cannot be resolved under capitalism. And the other thing is the threat of fascism, which is very, very real in this country. I did, in fact, come out and voted in 2020 for the first time in 50 years. Because it was not an election between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. It was a question of whether we would have fascism implemented very quickly in this country, or whether we would still continue to have a chance to fight against it. So these are the things that continue to motivate me up to this point. And I also studied and learned a lot. I spent a lot. Originally, I went back and I read all the. I read Marx and I read Lenin. I went to China. I read Mao, and today I read the contemporary communist writers like Baba Avakian and people who are really grappling with what would you have to do if you really wanted to do it, if you really wanted to save the planet, if you really wanted to make a society in which people would want to live and could live and live fulfilling lives. What would you actually have to do? What would the practical steps be? And so these are the questions that I engage with today.
Clark, are you doing any writing?
I'm actually a little bit like you, trying to do some videography now. So maybe you can see my camera in the background there.
Nice.
Because really, the world is for better or for worse, moving away from writing. And, the young revolutionaries that I work with today are putting stuff on TikTok every week. I mean, it's no wonder the establishment wants to get rid of TikTok. But I think that's kind of the wave of the future. I think it's video is the way that more and more political communication is and will be taking place.
Well, we're going to have you back on probably more often than you've been on. But one thing that I thought of, I know that you're a little cautious around the voting question, and I had sort of two things. I wanted to, in Georgia, which is a real battleground state, and I think in standing in opposition to fascism, where you did elect two Democratic senators, I'm wondering about the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, legacy in that state. And then if we got time, maybe your thoughts on even though it's part of the imperialist democratic process. What about democratic socialists kind of emerging in some cities? Like we have, I think, 9 people in our new city council who are DSA type people.
Well, I think that's a topic for a whole nother discussion. But I wish I could say that there was a SNCC legacy in Georgia, but frankly, I haven't seen it. I don't see it. I was actually down. I visited Atlanta and went to visited the SNCC office in the early '60s. I think I joined Friends of SNCC in '59 or something like that, and went to a SOC conference. You remember the Southern Student Organizing Committee?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, things like that. So it's in a certain sense, that willingness to put your body on the line and stand up for what is right is something that's not so much with us anymore. And the problem at this point I thought it was important in 2020 to because we bought ourselves some time. Let's put it that way.
We did.
We bought 4 years, but unfortunately, most of that has been squandered by people getting ready for doing another round of electoral cretinism. And the Democratic Party simply cannot be counted on to stop fascism in this country. And as a matter of fact, what would happen if we went through another election like this and Trump called on his people to march on Washington? Hey, that they would come armed. I know what it's like down here, and I know there's preparations going on everywhere for a civil war in this country. And the Democratic Party will fold in front of that like a wilted flower. So we really have to get much more serious in terms of the type of movement that has to be built if we are going to save ourselves and to save the future.
Well, I really appreciate that, and it's an ongoing debate in my own head. And this is an official invitation for you to come back on Live from the Heartland, and they're not too far off. And it's really been great talking to you, Clark. And it's even better than that STS email thing that we go back and forth on with a lot of people. This way, I get to see you, talk to you. So, do you have a website or a way that people can reach you if they want to see things that you're doing?
Sure. It's dissident.info, dissident.info.
Okay, brother. You have a great day and keep doing good in the world. We'll see you, and thanks for coming on Live from the Heartland.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, stay close here to your radios or to your TVs, however you're getting the show. We do it a lot of different ways, or your computer. And we're going to come back in a few minutes with Victor Salvo, the director and founder of the Legacy Project. And we're going to hear a little bit about what he's got going on. And I'm really honored to bring on someone who I haven't ever met before, but I've been learning about him and the good work he does. It's the one and only Victor Salvo, the co-director and co-founder of the Legacy Project. How are you, Victor?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Michael?
I'm good. How about telling the listeners, the viewers, about the Legacy Project?
Well, the Legacy Project is an education and cultural charity that's devoted to celebrating the contributions LGBTQ people have made to world history and culture, and to use that information as a tool to counter the ignorance which underlies bullying, both in the classroom and in society.
Aha. And how long have you been around and doing this?
I'd say we started work in earnest probably in 2008, incorporated in 2010, and never looked back from that point. So,
well, what led you to do it? I think I read somewhere that you had been thinking about doing this sort of thing for a long time. You were involved in uh, other work, and then you took this on and you've done a lot of stuff.
Yes, I was involved heavily in electoral politics and in early uh, gay activism, shall we say, going back to the time of the AIDS crisis, and was inspired at the National March on Washington for what we referred to at that time as lesbian and gay civil rights. We had not quite matured enough to embrace the B and the T and the Q and all the other alphabets that came upon it afterwards. But at that particular march, I was inspired by the first installation of the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. And it was there that several things happened at that march. It was the first time there had been a protest at the Supreme Court. It was on the heels of a horrible Supreme Court decision, which essentially made gay sex illegal in the United States, and that happened in 1986. And we were also embarking on the first time we recognized what would become known as National Coming Out Day, where we were expected to embrace our shared history. And the problem was none of us knew what it was. And I kind of put it all together and thought to myself, we're living history right now is unfolding right in front of us. There were 800,000 people at that march. And now there's a plague that's going to kill every single person here. Yet we're asked to remember our legacy. None of us knows what it is. Who's going to remember who came before us when we're gone if we don't know ourselves? So that was the catalyst of my idea to create an outdoor space complete with bronze memorials that would mark contributions that we had made throughout history, as a way to share the information with future generations, because we truly believe we were all going to die, that there was no thought of a cure or any kind of getting to zero thing at that time.
Victor, one of the things I don't know about that Supreme Court decision. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? That in '87 the Supreme Court basically outlawed gay sex.
It was the Hardwick. It was the Hardwick decision in 1986. Actually, it came down in June of '86. That was predicated on there was no. Ultimately, the reading was there was no constitutional right to engage in sodomy. Therefore, it was perfectly legal for any state so inclined to make effectively gay sex illegal in that state. And many states still had and still have their sodomy laws on the books. So this happening at the exact same time that AIDS was starting to kill us, sent a very powerful, very complex message, both to us and to society at large. And considering that gay people had always been, because of being closeted, the only knowledge of us was always predicated on a sex act. We were reduced to a sex act in the minds of most people, and then that sex act was rendered illegal. So it essentially negated our right to exist.
Is that law still on the books? I mean, or did the Supreme Court ever do anything better than that? I mean, it's been rough lately.
In 2003, the Lawrence decision, Lawrence v. Texas, overturned Hardwick. And that was the case that was the first time LGBTQ people were categorized as a, quote, class of persons, which is an extraordinarily important legal distinction because it rendered us to being thought of as a protected class the same way race, age, gender, and all these other things are typically considered to be protected classes. So when Lawrence was ruled, it overturned Hardwick, but it was 17 years in between the two court decisions. And today there are, I believe, still 14 states that never removed their sodomy laws from their state statutes. And I know that one of the principal targets of the current Supreme Court is to reinstate sodomy laws in the United States by striking down the Lawrence decision, because Lawrence was predicated on the right to privacy, and the right to privacy was was an evolution of Roe v. Wade. Now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, there technically no longer is a right to privacy in the United States. So they're going to make those sodomy laws active again in those 14 states. And from there, you will see the move to overturn same-sex marriage, because same-sex marriage will be predicated upon a sex act that's illegal in those states. So
Wow.
this is I've been paying attention for a long time. None of this is an accident.
As the father of two gay kids, I'm really always interested in learning more and more. And I know about Stonewall. I wondered if there's any sort of Chicago history that you might want to share about gay activism in this city. To a place now where we had a gay mayor. We have plenty of. It just seems like there are a lot of gay people around and doing good stuff. How did that come to be?
Chicago gay history is actually extremely rich and has been punctuated by certain things, not the least of which, of course, was the AIDS crisis here in Chicago, which reshaped the community politically and turned it into a political powerhouse from which everything else that has happened has flowed. We also, in the early days, just even going back to the time of Stonewall, interestingly enough, the year after the Stonewall riot, when technically the first gay pride parades all took place in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and San Francisco to commemorate the 1 year anniversary, actually Chicago's took place first. All the other cities did them on one day, and Chicago's was a day earlier. So technically speaking, Chicago actually hosted the very first gay pride parade in the country. And there's a group in Chicago that's moving to have that, the location of where that started in Bug House Square, to have a memorial placed there and to have that site declared a historic landmark for that reason as the site of the first gay pride parade in the country. But Chicago, we're very different than New York and Los Angeles and in Washington, D.C. It has a lot to do. We have an appreciation of history, which I think is because of the Chicago fire. So many people were wiped out and so much history was lost. We have an extremely diverse community as far as multiple ethnicities, and all of those groups were impacted by the fire. And we have a very much roll up our sleeves and get it done kind of attitude. So when time came to really begin pushing for increased AIDS funding and all that, the community finally stopped fighting amongst itself and found its voice and began to push forward changes, which eventually telegraphed throughout the entire state, making, in my estimation today, and I've looked pretty closely at this, I would go so far as to say that Chicago is probably the most progressive city in the country. And Illinois is easily in the top 3, if not the most progressive state in the country.
No, I agree with that. And, I love this city and the people who are making it a better and better place. One of the reasons that we had you on is because we learned about the Legacy Walk, which is an outdoor public display that is, I don't know what the status of it is right now, but on North Halsted Street. How about telling us about that and how that project will celebrate LGBTQ contributions to the world and to culture in general?
The Legacy Walk was the inaugural dedication took place in October of 2012, actually on the 25th anniversary of the day the idea had been conceived. So the walk now is fully complete. It's a half-mile long on both sides of the street, so a mile altogether, and consists of 49 bronze memorials, soon to be 51 because we're adding 2 more this year. Bronze memorials recognizing LGBT contributions to world history and culture. So it is there. It was declared a historic landmark in 2019. We do tours on a regular basis, and it's a great place to come and learn about an aspect of history most people don't realize is missing.
Is there a website where people can learn more about it that you would share with us?
Absolutely. Go to www.legacyprojectchicago.org and pour yourself a cup of tea or a glass of wine and prepare to enjoy yourself. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages on the website. And you'll have a wonderful time discovering people, many of whom you've already heard of and knew about, but did not know they were part of the LGBTQ community, and people you've never heard of who did extraordinary things that you have heard of. You just didn't know that there was a queer person behind it.
So they actually, there's a tour people could take, but they could also walk up and down Halsted Street.
Sure. Yeah, it's free. It's open air. It's everything that I had wanted it to be from the very beginning.
One of the things that caught my attention, being a sports fanatic, was there was an article on Outsports magazine that the Cubs, not my favorite team, I'll confess, is sponsoring a bronze memorial to honor the only openly gay man to have played Major League Baseball, Glenn Burke. I'm sure there are other gay fellows playing ball, but tell us a little bit about Glenn Burke and his induction into the Legacy Walk coming up.
In the 1970s, Burke was outed. He didn't come out to his team. He was actually outed. He played for, I believe it was the Dodgers, and he played for two teams, and he was only in the majors for 4 years altogether because the one team traded him to the other. And he ended up being outed basically because he was believed to be in a relationship with Tommy Lasorda's son. And word got around, and he was tormented mercilessly on both teams, and he ended up quitting the majors. And it's very, very sad story because he descended into a life of drugs and homelessness. He eventually passed away from AIDS several years later, but he actually kind of cleaned up his act and was an instrumental person in the first gay games that took place in 1982. And he's recognized now as not only the first openly gay person to play in Major League Baseball, but he is also, believe it or not, the man who invented the high five. He slapped a high five to Dusty Baker when Dusty was rounding and coming into home plate. And then Burke immediately after that hit his own home run. And no one had ever seen that gesture before, and so he actually is credited with the creation of the high five.
Oh, that's a great story, Victor. Let me, these are short segments, and there's a lot more to talk about, so I hope that we'll get you back on the show.
Oh,
but
sure.
There are a couple of things that why don't you tell both our listeners and our viewers about your textbook and the Legacy Wall.
The Legacy Wall is our traveling installation. It's been to 45 cities across the United States since beginning its tour in 2017. Has 125 biographical elements on it. It's basically the size of a very large trade show installation. It, like the Legacy Walk, is digitally interactive and is connected directly to the database and the website, which houses all of the curriculum that has been created for the state of Illinois. Many people don't realize that the teaching of LGBTQ narratives historically is required in the state of Illinois, and we are the architects of that curriculum. And we're now in the process of writing our first textbook, which will be the first of a series that'll come out sometime in 2024. And it's called LGBTQ History Makers When They Were Kids.
Well, one of the things, you mentioned earlier, the gay marriage, and it seemed to me that we were really on a positive direction. A lot of people, whereas they don't have like a Latino or African American in their family, a lot of people have in their family or know someone who's gay, and we seem to make great strides. All of a sudden, in the last few years, particularly in this kind of Trumpian era, we see a real pushback and kind of the rise of fascist forces. I wonder if you have any comments on where we're at and what people need to be aware of and to do going forward. That's a big one, but give it a shot.
Well, yes, it is a very big one. And I'm somewhat reluctant to speak about politics just because we're a charity and we risk our charitable status to make a commentary. I will say that I have been through this before. the gay community was never more vulnerable than when one out of every four gay men was dying. And every single force in the country, political, social, religious, was poised against us. We have never been so hated, so marginalized, so crippled, so behind the eight ball as we were during the AIDS crisis. Nothing that is happening today even remotely comes close to what was happening to this community during the AIDS crisis. We won. We won that war. We are the only group that has ever gone up against the religious right and won. So the issue why things are becoming what they are right now is because we have already won the culture war. That's over with. And now they're going after trans people and drag queens and going on about the children. And all of that is really just because most people just don't know a trans person. And they don't know anybody who does drag, and generally speaking. Whereas, as you said correctly, pretty much every single person in the country knows somebody who's gay, whether it's a relative or a friend or a coworker or whatever. So they can't really come after gay people overtly, though they will be. That's there's no real comfort there. They're just going after trans folks now because they're most vulnerable. And all of this is really about, in my estimation, the attempt to convert the United States into a theocracy and to alter the Constitution literally into a form of Sharia law that follows a very, very narrow and extremely conservative interpretation of biblical teachings. And this is their last hurrah. This is it. The 25% of people under the age of 24 are identifying as queer. 25%.
Wow.
That is enough to carry. That is enough to carry every election from now going forward. If they do not succeed in actually taking over this country in the next 2 to 3 years, let's say 2024 presidential election, and they have people in place all throughout the government, from the Supreme Court all the way down to the school boards. If they do not succeed in taking over the country and dismantling the basic tools of democracy, they will never do it because they simply do not represent the majority of Americans. They don't even represent the majority of conservatives. They are a very, very tiny sect with a great deal of outsized influence, and they're fighting for their existence because somehow they've convinced themselves that that they're the ones being targeted. When the truth of the matter is, all they do is target other people. So I'm actually confident that we will win this fight. It's just going to be very long and it's going to be very difficult. And I think gay people are going to rise to the occasion and be extremely pivotally important on behalf of the entire country.
No, they're pretty political.
Yeah.
I know my kids are.
Yeah.
Victor Salvo, I really want to thank you for coming on live from the Heartland. I hope to meet you in person. I'm sure we've been in the same room together, maybe at some same weddings. But I'm going to look forward to having you back on the show because there's a lot more to talk about.
Great. I look forward to it as well. Thank you so much for having us on.
Thank you. And everyone stay tuned here on the left end of your dial if you're listening to it on the air or streamed. We'll be right back with more live from the Heartland. We've got Don Rose coming on. He's not going to be talking politics like usual. We're going to talk about literary deaths. We'll be right back with more live from the Heartland. We are recording it on the 21st. And it brings me a lot of pleasure once again to bring on someone who has been so gracious to come on this show every time he's been asked. Usually we talk serious politics. I know that literature and politics do mix sometimes, but we're going to focus on literary deaths today. So once again, I present Don Rose. Hello, Don. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Always glad to join you when I can. I took a little, on my weekly column, which is 98% politics. I do an occasional thing on art or this and that, an occasional book review. It struck me a few days ago that 3 literary giants have all died just within a month of each other. Martin Amis, who many people think was the greatest living a British writer who was a great fan of American writers. His favorite writers of all were Saul Bellow and Vladimir Nabokov, who considered himself an American, even though he was Russian-born. Anyway, Martin Amis died on May 19th. He was 73, the youngest of the three deaths. And then on June 13th, someone who many people consider the greatest living American writer. I could have supported that concept. Cormac McCarthy died at age 89, just on the verge of being 90, trying to catch up with me. He'll never catch me. And then the day after McCarthy died, a lesser known figure, Robert Gottlieb, who was considered one of the great literary editors of our time, who edited Nobel Prize winners and John le Carré's international thrillers and Lauren Bacall's autobiography, and just a huge wide range of books. He died. He was also, by the way, the editor of the New Yorker for 5 years, which is, many people consider the best general interest magazine we've ever had. And he kept the standard, and then he ran into a dispute with the new owner of all the magazines in that group. So anyway,
let me ask you. The only guy I know in this group that I've read is Cormac McCarthy. And I know when I go to El Paso, and I first started going down there just after 2002, I think it was, people would show me where he had lived. And then I read a couple of his books. I read Blood Meridian. And I got to say that as much as people talk about the great prose of this guy, to me, all I can remember is Dead Indians. I mean, it was just the most gruesome book I think I'd ever read. Your take on Cormac McCarthy?
Well, Cormac McCarthy, I think maybe I summed it up in my column when I referred to him as the poet laureate of American violence and our violent underbelly. And he was one of those people, along with Larry McMurtry, to turn around the whole concept of the Old West that we used to have, and of the cowboy legend that we used to have, and expose, as in Blood Meridian, the killing of the Indians. But he was also, as he went on, I think many people might have seen the movie
No Country for Old Men. Yeah.
Country for Old Men. And you remember that Javier Bardem won, and a lot of people were worried about the character he played. He was a cold-blooded murderer who chose gruesome ways to kill people, and won an Academy Award for that thing. Now, I know a lot of people can't read about violence, and don't like to go to movies that are violent and so on. I grant that that's very difficult, as I say. Used to say on TV before a bloody scene, this is going to be a little difficult to watch. It's hard to watch. But his whole late work from Blood Meridian on was devoted to the violence, the ugly violence of the Old West. Although he had one big bestseller, and
The Road, was that the one that?
The Road sold well. That was a dystopian novel where you're going through the ruins of Earth as it's gone. I was referring to All the Pretty Horses, which I think was his first book after Blood Meridian, and it turned out to be a very big hit. it was well, somebody put it that for the first time he wrote a book about somebody you could cheer as as a protagonist, because all of his other protagonists were not people you'd want to spend a lot of time with, you know. But it was a wonderful story, upending. You know, it had its violent moments, but not to the extent that Blood Meridian or The Road has. The Road is a very dystopian book, but it also made a movie, and it seems to me that it was one of three or four rather interesting books by serious writers about, you know, the end of the earth or the end of civilization on the earth. And there is no question that his style is absolutely brilliant. He started writing in a more, when he was living in the South, he started writing what was Southern regionalism that was derived from William Faulkner. And his prose was a little closer to Faulkner's. He wasn't an imitator, but you could tell that it was derived from the kind of biblical writing that Faulkner did. I personally feel that Faulkner is still the greatest American novelist of the last century, but that's always debatable. That was something I used to talk about with James Baldwin many years ago. We had more. I think we had more discussions when I knew him in Paris, and I think we had more discussions about Faulkner than we did about race.
Wow.
Of course, he was. This was when he was coming out as a novelist. He had just published "Go Tell It on the Mountain," so we really talked a lot of literature, and that's what he wanted to talk about.
All right. Well, Don Rose, tell us a little bit about Martin Amis and Robert Gottlieb. Maybe more Robert Gottlieb, because he's an American, and I'm more likely to probably read that. But these are guys I don't know a lot about. So give us a little bit what you want to share.
Well, he, for one thing, he edited the novels of one of our truly great American writers, Nobel Prize winner Toni Morrison.
Aha.
He'll bid fair to become. We don't know to what extent he shaped his novels, but he also edited another Nobel Prize winner, V.S. Naipaul, who's a totally different writer, British writer. And the funny story that people remember about him is, I guess there's two funny stories. One of them is the fact that he had a novel from a young World War veteran with a manuscript that was called Catch 18. And he thought it was a very good book, a very funny book. I think it's possibly one of the funniest books I've ever read, at the same time as it's a tragic book about what happened in that war. And it turned out that another sort of a pop writer, I forget his name, was coming out with a book called Mila 18. And so Gottlieb says, we got to change the name of your book so there won't be any confusion. Now, how about Catch 22?
Right.
That seems to have stuck and rung a bell. The other great story about him was that he received a 1,000,000-word manuscript from Robert Caro, C-A-R-O, who many people know has written this monstrosity, I should monstrously sized, a 4-volume biography of Lyndon Johnson. But this was his first book, and it was about a great character who ran New York. It was called The Power Broker, which today is considered one of the truly great biographies in the English language. And what Gottlieb did was cut 400,000 words, almost 500,000 words, out of a 1,000,000-word book, out of The Power Broker. And Cairo, I'm sure, was pained at every cut, but what he wound up with was almost a work of genius. So he was, one of the. We don't really hear too much about book editors and so on, unless they come out and they wind up with a string of people that you say, well, there must be something there if he can bring us some of these books. So I'm sorry.
We're running out of time.
Well, I'm almost running out of words. Me run out of words.
You did great, Don, and I'll be in touch with you real soon. We'll talk more politics next time you're on. But I like literature. I might look at some of these books and read a little more Cormac McCarthy. Thanks for joining us.
Cormac McCarthy. Read All the Pretty Horses first, and that'll get you back into it.
Okay, brother. Thanks a lot. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in and being a part of our listening audience. However you get this, by radio, online, on CAN TV. I want to thank Clark Kissinger. I want to thank Victor Salvo, and I want to thank Don Rose. Next week, I've got some authors. It's an article in New Lines magazine about Andrew Tate and the far right in common cause with Islamists. And we'll also have Kelly Cassidy and do a little sports with Gordon Thompson. We encourage you all to do good in the world. The world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Have a great week.